Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm your host, Garrett Justice, and today I am joined by Tom Shaw, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Lone Stream Mortgage and also a Managing Director at 11X Marketing. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Garrett. Thanks for having me on.
It's so great to have you today. I'm really excited to dive into our topic today. I think it's going to be a really fun one. But before we do that, why don't you give our listeners a brief overview of your career and what, you are busy doing every day with all of these companies and things you're involved with?
Yeah, no, my history is funny. It just started in the advertising agency, cut my teeth there for a couple of years, working kind of through everything, did the whole .com boom as a marketer, got digital marketing kind of in my background, was in consumer and B2B, and then got into mortgage finance for the past 17 years, been working with B2B and B2C companies there. And through this, during kind of one of my stints, I guess you might say between companies, started a marketing agency called 11X Marketing. And we're a national agency, all remote associates that work to help fill in the gaps that chief marketing officers typically need on their team. And 11X Marketing works on the basis of fixed price marketing events. So marketers can predict their budgets every month and know their expenses, where with typical agencies, quite frankly, you never know sometimes month to month what you're being charged. So I'm proud to have be working with 11X Marketing and at Lone Stream to be their chief marketing officer as well. So it's great to be here. And again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, and we're really excited to have you on today. I know you have, excuse me, I know you have a lot of expertise when it comes to marketing. I mean, you also sit on the board for the University of California at their school for a design thinking position. Is that right?
That's correct. It's focused on typically the customer experience and working through that process and educating executives on how to best serve their customers through the process and bringing different thinking, different ideas to the evolving, you might say, kind of, customer experience and customer satisfaction, customer engagement kind of continuum.
Yeah, love that. Well, I'm really excited to hear from, this expertise, wealth of experience that you have. And today is especially a fun topic because, as you and I were talking about, what do we talk about today? You pulled from this experience that you have in the past of negotiating sports sponsorships. And I think that's something that's, can be pretty glamorous for a lot of marketers, especially those who haven't done it before. It can be something that can be really fun. It's one of those things that all of us would probably love to do, but few of us have done. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that today. But more importantly, before we jump into that, you and I were talking before, and you got to tell me with, recent events and you being in Southern California down there, are you a Dodgers fan or are you an Angels fan?
Our family's actually both, right? We're both Dodgers and Angels and I hate to say this because I've done deals with both of those organizations, and they're both great organizations, and worked with, the executives and some of the players there on both. So we're happy to see the Dodgers kind of pull it out in the win, and we were happy previous years to see the Angels pull it out as well. So, we're lucky actually to have two great teams here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's jump into this topic of these sports sponsorships then, shall we? And really just to start off, I want to just approach this for, the marketer who might be a novice when it comes to this. So tell us just a little bit more about what are the different types of sports sponsorships that marketers could consider?
Yeah, and I'll lead off with saying that, there's not to my knowledge, a real course, right, that you can take
Yeah.
on how to negotiate these, right? A lot of it's kind of on the job experience. And so novice marketers shouldn't be intimidated by that, right? There's some basic principles and such that we'll go over, right, that you probably should kind of keep handy and think about. And it's always good to talk to somebody who's had some experience with this or even get some guidance. But from a sports sponsorship standpoint, what you're really looking at is, and this comes with experience, right, is you're looking at everything from, and I categorize them into four different areas: a player sponsorship, where you sponsor, let's say, a great player, a driver, possibly, a hockey athlete, whomever it is, right? You're getting a player sponsorship that aligns with your brand, right? And you're planning on promoting them, co-branding with them to get that halo effect, right? The second type of sponsorship is a team sponsorship that you can do, and these can be cut together in terms of negotiation or separately. Team, so that could be, hey, the Dodgers, right? Like we talked about, team sponsorship, where you work with the Dodgers and their brand. and then of course you can move on to the arena, right? So it could be, necessarily, let's say the Honda Center here in Southern California, right? Working with the arena there. And that could be, suites and signage and all that kind of great stuff, as well as the home team that works, that plays out of that arena. And then you've got the league, right? And the league sponsorship. And so these four different groups that typically that you can work with all commingle, and it makes it sometimes confusing, and it makes your contract sometimes a little more complex, because you may go into it saying, hey, I want, let's say, a league sponsorship, but the league and the arena don't work together sometimes, right? So you've got often to do a well-rounded sponsorship, you have to incorporate several of those factors together and see where the different athletic groups can commingle them. So sometimes, for example, teams can commingle players into your contract, and sometimes arenas can commingle the teams, but oftentimes the league, like the NHL or NASCAR, is separate from actually the, let's say, the racetrack, the local racetrack that you might work with to do a brand sponsored event, or get a suite for your company, or let's say get 15 hot passes to bring, your great B2B customers down into the pits to meet Jeff Gordon, right? Necessarily, that stuff. So all that necessarily has to be thought of when you kind of go into these sports sponsorships. You've got to know the difference between each one of those and what the limitations are.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that that's super helpful, having that framework of, these are your four: player, team, arena, and the league. And sometimes they might overlap. You do some of those together, and sometimes they don't. You have to negotiate them separately. So, as we continue on, down this path of talking about sports sponsorships, I think there's probably a lot of marketers out there who've never done this before, who wonder, are sports sponsorships right for our organization? So how do you think about that? Are there different sizes of companies? Is it works better with B2B versus B2C, or, vice versa? Like what's the criteria that you use to evaluate, is this right for our brand?
Right. And you can, it's really easy anywhere you show up sometimes, or even look on TV, or you see the associations, all sizes of companies enter into these agreements, right? Necessarily. So as a rule, really what you want to kind of think about, and you want to discuss with your senior team, and especially those who are sponsoring it, right? Whether it's your chief marketing officer, your president, your CEO, your CFO, you want to make sure you're all on the same page. One, that, you want to do this, and two, that you're passionate about it for the company. And so start, quite frankly, with a sport that you love. One of the companies that I worked with, they were passionate about racing, and they were in American Le Mans and NASCAR and different kind of area of races within NASCAR, at the time. So you really have to kind of couple the passion with also the engagement that you have for the sport, for one. And then second, you've got to then look at what your goals are from a marketing perspective. Are your goals awareness? Are your goals entertaining your business to business customers and giving them a VIP experience they couldn't get anywhere else? Or, is it, quite frankly, something for your associates? Or are you trying to improve your brand recognition and the credibility of your brand by attaching it to, a premier name like the Dodgers, or maybe like a premier driver, right, in NASCAR, or possibly, a football team or a key star. Items like that, you've got to kind of map out what your strategy is and identify also if it's local or national. And so if you're local, you may want to stay more arena based. If it's national, you may need to go more league based, quite frankly. And, and that's where you kind of start talking about players as well. So it takes a little bit of thinking. Definitely takes a lot of communication within the organization, because you want to make sure that the price tag is kind of within the budget that you want to spend, because you are working with six figures, if not more, sometimes on these sponsorships and engagements. And so, and then you also want to think about what you're going to get out of it, and also prepare your organization for the results you're going to see, because sometimes these results don't translate directly into leads and sales today. They translate into greater awareness that supports, let's say, sales team or future sales down the road. Or, quite frankly, sometimes they do turn into future sales or immediate sales if you market it and in tandem, let's say, with the event that's going on, right, to drive calls or to drive website visits. So it's many different aspects to it, but you do want to make sure that obviously you get, everybody on the same page from a senior leadership perspective. You want to make sure you identify your goals, for sure. Think national or think local to kind of start off with. And then you can kind of direct yourself from there and think about it, and then kind of go do some more investigation and look at the companies today that are doing some of the sponsorships, maybe in the sport that you're in, and then also see really how they're executing on that. Right, it might be your competitors, it might be those that are horizontally aligned in your industry.
Yeah, excellent advice. I think there's so much there. I mean, some of the things that I hear you saying, as I think about, that advice that you just shared is, number one, especially if you're a smaller company, you got to make sure you have, a pretty tight brand. You got to know who you're selling to. You got to know what your brand stands for. And from there, I think that can then help guide a lot of these strategy and decisions. You got to obviously make sure you're communicating, like you said, and having alignment from the team and what your goals are and everything else. But I think, especially for those smaller companies that are still trying to figure it out a little bit, you got to make sure have that locked in, why you're doing this and does it really align with your brand and in which way, right?
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Well, okay. So you've given us a little bit of an overview now of the different types of sponsorships and, how you think about, is this right for your organization? So let's say, I'm a marketer now who thinks, okay, this might be the right thing for my organization. Where do I go to start finding the right sports sponsorships? Like, where do I start?
I know, and it, like I said, there's no playbook, right, for this necessarily to go out with, and a lot of what I've learned over time, quite frankly, has been through trial and error, right? So it's been a lot of kind of beating the phone or talking with people, even talking with leaders like myself in other organizations, finding out what they found. When you start, and you have kind of all that we just talked about a little bit behind you, you want to go out, if you've identified a sport, start calling around to, if it's arenas, you can actually call the arena itself, right, and get their sales department and talk to somebody there. They're more than happy to talk to you, let me tell you, about various types of sponsorships that they have. And you'll start getting an idea of kind of, what is going on there. They, in turn, often the local arena can push you up to the league and get you contact there. They can also get you contacts with players, right? So an arena is a good area to start, at first, or a team connection, because they love to send you up. Let's say, the Staples Center would love to kind of get you in the NBA, right? They love to get you to the league, and they'd love to get you kind of aligned with one of their key players for the Lakers, or or necessarily for the Clippers, right? As they get out there. So, but I'll tell you, and you got to be careful sometimes with doing this, and, make sure that the conversations you're having are relevant, because they will. If you're a leader or a marketer, you don't often have a lot of time. So make sure that you've got, the right people talking to you, and you're asking, the right questions when you can, because they'll want to meet for 2 or 3 or 4 hours sometimes, and they know it's a long sale, right? So do a lot of kind of pre-work, is my advice. Get them to send you information ahead of time so you can proof it, for sure, and look at their target segments, right? So the NBA, the MLB, NASCAR are all going to have target segments that they reach through their audiences and certain types of customers. You want to know who those are, and you want to make sure those align with your customer base that you're trying to reach and the goals you're trying to make. If it's off, go on to the next one, or go to a different arena, or go to a different league, or report back to your executive team and tell them it's not a fit, but I think this is, right? You've got to start there. I worked at a company where they decided to do an MLB sponsorship, and it was, a B2B company, and they wanted to do products, they want to do one of these product nights where you distribute, information to consumers. Consumers had no idea who the heck we were, and it was just misaligned, right? When you do things like that. But on the flip side of that, I was sitting in a NASCAR trailer one day, with a premier movie group kind of sitting on my right side, and we were talking. They're saying, "Oh yeah, we need a car to kind of get out so we could get a movie shot in Talladega Nights, right, with Will Ferrell." Yeah. And I said, "Well, hey, we'd be willing to do that. Do we have to pay anything?" And they're like, "No, we'll do that if you guys cover the car cost. We'll put you in there for free." We got I don't know, $5.5 million worth of kind of brand exposure for that, right? Wow. With our car. The logo's all over the car, and it all happened from like sitting next to somebody. So it's all about kind of like identifying those opportunities and doing the business development also to make sure that your sponsorship pays off. But it only happens when you do that pre-work up front with the league or the arena, and making sure that those aligned with kind of your customer base. And when that happens, you know, you can kind of flow those business development kind of opportunities also out of it and get added value that your executive team loves.
Awesome. That's such great advice and very, very cool experiences and stories to kind of help illustrate that. So far we've talked about, okay, the different types of sports sponsorships, then, you know, some of the criteria to evaluate, you know, is a sports sponsorship right for me? Some of the things we talked about is making sure that there's alignment with that team, making sure you really understand what your goals are and who your brand is and why you're doing this, then where to start. It's a lot about doing research and making sure that it fits and aligns with those goals. You know, now we get into like the contract negotiation phase, right? So what advice do you have for us? What should people know about that contract negotiation phase once they've found something that feels like it would fit and align with the goals that they established?
Yeah, you know, first off, if I'm not sure about other marketers, but it seems like a lot of my job seems to be reviewing a heck of a lot of contracts all the time. So I'm pretty adept at evaluating contracts. However, sports sponsorship contracts are different, and again, they've got to align to what your goals are, so the contract has to reflect that. But in negotiating, just be prepared that you're not trying to necessarily get a deal. Is my best advice for you, right? It's not to grind the player, the arena, the league down on their price, right? Because they have other options they can go to for one. What you want to make sure in the negotiation is, are your goals being met and are you getting fair value, right? So I think every contract should be about fair value. So in addition to that, you want to make sure that your agreement reflects the conversations that you've had. So again, if you're getting the fair value that you want and you're accomplishing the goals, then both parties are kind of winning. And if you're prepared for the cost ahead of time, then really the contract shouldn't be stressful. And quite frankly, you're hashing out more of the details around, well, how many times is this player going to come out to maybe my corporate office to give my, you know, people, a talk? Are they going to show up at our annual event? Or how many, sweet tickets do we get for our team to kind of come out to that arena? How many hot passes do we get for our B2B customers to come down into the pits, all that kind of good stuff. You work out more details like that than it is really around cost. So you're working around delivering value for the money that you're spending rather than necessarily trying to get the best cost. In addition to that, that value is also around exclusivity. So with league contracts, arena contracts, if there are other companies in your vertical that are necessarily part of the sponsorship, you want to be made aware of that, and B, you want first right of refusal to make sure that they can't enter unless there's something specific going on. And I'll give you an example. One is there was a sponsor at one point for a major league that owned the bank of, let's call it, we're the exclusive bank for national the NBA, right? National Basketball Association. There at that time, we were looking to kind of possibly be part of, that league sponsorship. And since a bank owned kind of, let's say, the finance vertical, the NBA had to go back and ask them, hey, can we get the mortgage exclusivity for that and sell it over here, right, to this group? And the bank had first right of refusal basically on that in their contract to say, hey, either block us or to necessarily allow it. And I don't know if they got money out of the deal or not, but necessarily usually some kind of arrangement can be struck on that as well. So you want to make sure that you have first right of refusal and exclusivity. And on player contracts, the other piece of advice I would give you is just make sure you've got ethics clauses and morality clauses in those, right? So you can't cut them loose if something happens, but also that you also make sure that you've got an understanding of who they're sponsoring and that you're made aware of any new sponsorships that come up. So if you're a conservation company or a green company and possibly your player chooses to endorse something that's opposed to that, diametrically opposed, you want to make sure that you're aware or that you can unfortunately block it. Not that you want to cut them off, but you do want to make sure that you're aligned with your brand, because that player or even that arena can possibly impact your brand once you tie, it could be a couple $1 million together and promoting both of them together. So when somebody thinks of the Dodgers and they think of your brand together, all of a sudden the Dodgers go off and do something kind of hinky. All of a sudden your brand is impacted by that, right? So there are many complexities to this that really you want to make sure that you have kind of your head around and you're thinking through. And sometimes specialists can help you with this, no doubt. But also, a good team, and if you have a good legal team, they'll help you with this as well.
It's awesome. Yeah, that halo effect can be both positive and negative, huh? So
Yeah.
I think that's excellent advice. So again, just kind of recapping some of those highlights of that advice that you gave in that contract negotiation phase. It's really about value. So understand that like these can be 6-figure or higher contracts before you go into it. Have a good understanding of that so you know what you're getting yourself into, and push for value, exclusivity, and the right clauses in the contract that help protect you and your brand in the long run. Is that right?
That is correct. And let me add one more thing is
Mm-hmm.
that you need to think about these engagements as partnerships, right? So think of every contract as a partnership, not as a vendor-client relationship, right? Because they're
Yeah.
going to try to work for you, and you're going to also be asked to sometimes bend and work with them, even though you are the client, because certain things happen. Believe me, these things happen. But you also want them to be multi-year, right? So you don't want to do an investment for 1 year. You want to do it for 2 or 3 years, sometimes 4 or 5, because A, you get the best value, and B, also you build that relationship in which you get more value over time.
Right.
When these organizations, be it arena teams and even leagues, sense that you're in it for the longer run, they're willing to work with you on giving you and delivering you more value than you have necessarily even in your contract. A lot of that happens off the books and on inside meetings and such like that. So just think of it from that perspective too. Again, it's I think the value idea is one we kind of have to focus on more than anything else.
Love that. Tom, this is awesome. I just feel like I'm just soaking all this up myself. I think this has just been super great. You shared some awesome tips. As we kind of think through this further, how would you really sum up what we talked about today, and what other pieces of advice would you give to marketers out there who are listening, who are interested in exploring sports sponsorships further for their brands?
Yeah, I'd encourage you to speak to other senior leaders who have done this, whether it's myself or other folks, just to get an idea of kind of sometimes how to start. And sometimes I know it's hard to figure out where to start. And I know it can sound intimidating, but everybody in the organizations, down to the players, are normal people. And they're all typically, very good communicators, and they want to work with you, right? That their deal is they really want to work with you. They want to bring you on, and they want to make sure that you have a white glove experience, right? I would say all the organizations I've worked with, Dodgers, Angels, NASCAR, NBA, PGA, they all want you to have, and want your associates and any of your customers to have just the most awesome experience they can have. And so you're going to be treated well, which is great for you. And don't go in thinking like, I don't know anything about this, because they're going to help educate you, because they want to sell it to you. They want to make sure that it's a good fit too, because they're looking at a multi-year agreement as well. So if it's not a fit, it's really a waste of their time, because they could be getting the right partner in there instead of your organization, right? So it's in both interests really to know that you're aligned. So don't feel like you're necessarily not as educated. Start talking to people. Start talking to the arenas, to the leagues even. And get information from them. Ask them for the information that you want. Don't be shy. They have it, and they have even more information than really you probably care to look at in terms of demographics, psychographics, right? And even opportunities for those customers that buy possibly your product, or even products in your vertical, and what their brand, league, company, actually how they impact that, right? And that's all great information to have. But again, if you're a leader, start by networking and talking to people is probably the best thing to do.
Awesome. Excellent advice. As we kind of wrap up here, the last question I have for you really on this topic is, our podcast Brandland is really about, stories and experiences of people building brands. So how would you, based on your experiences in the past, how would you summarize the value that you have really gotten to help build the brands through doing some of these sports sponsorships?
Yeah. It's funny that I think sports sponsorships add tremendous value, right? But again, they have to be, I think, executed the right way. And that's the tough part, right? The idea of getting a sports sponsorship, anybody can come up with that, and that'll come out of the top ranks and say, hey, we ought to do that. But quite frankly, executing that is tough, and that comes down to a well-organized strategy and plan and aligning that with your customer base. So it's not something, if it looks easy, it's not. And from my perspective, I would tell you that building the right brand platform and incorporating sports sponsorships is a great way to either augment your B2B customer base and give them experiences they haven't had before, or expand your awareness on the B2C side, and gain that customer kind of awareness and or necessarily kind of alignment with your brand credibility that you otherwise couldn't have. If you can afford it, it's fantastic. Just make sure that execution is tied in, whether it's on the ground, events, displays, all that good stuff, or it's just even within your company, making sure that they're aware that this is going on, and having events for your team. I mean, at several companies, we have the team come over sometimes for a team day, right? You have 5 players come over, and you have burgers and dogs and all that great stuff outside. You have a grill, and everybody commingles and they take pictures and goes on social media, all that great stuff. That's just as important as getting your customers out there. So it works on many levels within an organization, and sometimes people only see it from the outside. But it's sponsorships are very complex, and the impact they have can be very complex as well. So as a leader, just I would say make yourself aware of all those so that you can translate that value to not only the company, but also your executive peers, so that they know what you're getting out of it. And they'll see it. Everybody will feel good usually about it as they see it. So I've always found it's very exciting. It's also it's a morale booster for the company itself. And find customers, if aligned properly, will call you mainly because you are a sponsor of that team. It's really funny. They'll say, "Hey, I love so-and-so. I want to buy from you." And that the salesperson loves hearing that. And next thing you know, you get an email across the company going, "This guy just called me, I'm doing an XX sale because this guy, saw us on TV. And he says, I love that guy, and I'm in with you." Right. And that's just more reinforcement, right, that you get from doing these things.
That's awesome. I think this has been excellent advice, Tom. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your wealth of wisdom and a kind of complicated thing to negotiate when it comes to marketing. But, if there are listeners who have follow-up questions for you or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. Just mention that you saw the podcast or heard the podcast, and say, "Hey," and then, if you have a question or something, or want to connect, put it in the notes so that I know what it's about, and be happy to connect with you and provide more insight as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, Tom, and again, thank you so much for your time today, and hope you have a great rest of the day there in sunny Southern California.
Thanks, Garrett. It's a pleasure being here, and love the podcast.
Thanks. We'll talk later.
All right, take care.